I woke up to the sound of my life being dismantled at 5:47 on a Tuesday morning. The harsh blue light of my phone screen cut through the dark bedroom, showing a single automated alert from Texas Heritage Bank. Access to my grandmother's trust had been frozen. The balance was $520,000. Under the status line, the app displayed a fresh update indicating a new power of attorney had just been executed. My chest tightened, but my hands were steady when I dialed my mother. Susan picked up on the second ring. She did not sound like a woman woken up before dawn. She sounded prepared. Before I could ask what was happening, she spoke in a smooth, rehearsed tone. "Family first, Olivia. We needed it." The line went dead. Welcome back to Elderly Stories, where we explore the raw truth of what happens when the people supposed to protect you decide to sell you out instead. If you have ever been the one expected to fix everyone else's mistakes, you know exactly how heavy that phone felt in my hand. Let me know in the comments how old you are and where you are listening from, and do not forget to subscribe. My name is Olivia Harrison. I am 32 years old, living in Austin, Texas. For my entire life, I have been the quiet, reliable daughter, the shock absorber for a family that operates on chaos. While my brother Liam drifted from one expensive failure to another, I kept my head down, paid my own way through college, and built a stable life. The trust was the one thing my grandmother left specifically in my name to protect it from my parents. I did not call my mother back. I did not scream or throw the phone across the room. I stood up, put on my gray suit, grabbed my state-issued credentials, and drove toward downtown Austin. The traffic on the interstate was a crawl, but my mind was moving with cold precision. My parents have always viewed my stability as a communal asset. They called my career unfeminine and overly serious. They told their friends I just worked a boring desk job. They had no idea what I actually do for a living. I am a Senior Fraud Investigator for the Texas State Department of Financial Regulation. I spend my days untangling corporate embezzlement, identity theft, and financial extortion. I trace stolen money for the state government. I pulled into the bank parking lot 10 minutes before the doors opened. I sat in the driver's seat watching the tellers unlock the glass entrance. My parents thought they could leverage my obedience. They thought the old societal myth that blood is thicker than water would keep me quiet while they emptied my future to fund whatever mess Liam had created this time. They assumed I would just take the hit and accept my place as the load-bearing pillar of their delusion. They were wrong. I grabbed my leather briefcase, walked through the double doors, and approached the branch manager's desk. It was time to show them exactly what my boring desk job entails. The heavy glass doors of Texas Heritage Bank swung open exactly at 9 o'clock. I bypassed the teller line and walked directly toward the glass-walled offices in the back. The air inside smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and cheap hazelnut coffee. A man in a tailored navy suit sat behind the corner desk. His nameplate read, "David Sterling, Branch Manager." He looked up from his monitor with the practiced hollow smile of someone used to dealing with morning inconveniences. I took the seat across from him without waiting for an invitation. "I need to speak with you about a fraudulent freeze on my trust account," I said. My voice was calm and measured. I placed my driver license on the polished mahogany surface. David glanced at the ID and then typed my name into his system. He leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers. The smile remained fixed on his face, but his eyes took on a patronizing glaze. "Ah, yes, Miss Harrison. I see the flag on the account. There is no fraud here. A new durable power of attorney was filed electronically early this morning by your father, Richard Harrison. It designates him as your primary financial agent. Under our policy, the funds are temporarily frozen to transition management control to him." He spoke to me using the slow, deliberate cadence one might use to explain a math problem to a slow child. It was a tone I recognized instantly. My father used the exact same inflection whenever we discussed money. Growing up, Richard controlled every dollar that entered or left our household. He used his income as a leash, keeping my mother compliant and my brother Liam dependent. Liam had spent the last 10 years launching one disastrous business venture after another, and my father always swooped in to clean up the ledger. I was the outlier. I moved out, paid my own bills, and never asked for a dime. My financial independence always irritated my father because it meant I was outside his jurisdiction. Now he was trying to drag me back in. I leaned forward. I did not authorize a power of attorney, David. My father filed a forged document. I want the freeze lifted, and I want the origin file of that submission. David let out a soft, condescending sigh. He picked up his coffee cup and took a slow sip. Miss Harrison, I understand these family transitions can be emotional. Sometimes parents step in when they feel their children need help managing large sums. Your father is a respected client here. He submitted the standard digital paperwork through our secure portal. It is a standard family procedure. We cannot just lift a freeze because you are having a disagreement with your dad. I suggest you go home and talk it out with him. The minor conflict of navigating bank bureaucracy had just hit a wall. David was actively choosing to protect a wealthy older man rather than listen to the young woman sitting in front of him. He assumed I was just a naive daughter throwing a tantrum over her allowance. He had no idea he was talking to someone who spent 40 hours a week dismantling financial crimes for the state of Texas. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue with his patronizing logic. I simply reached into my suit jacket, pulled out a black leather wallet, and flipped it open on the desk right next to my driver license. The silver star of the Texas State Department of Financial Regulation caught the harsh fluorescent light. Below the seal, my identification card read, Olivia Harrison, Senior Fraud Investigator. David stopped breathing. His hand froze halfway between his desk and his mouth, the coffee cup trembling slightly. The condescending smile vanished, replaced by the pale, rigid expression of a man realizing he had just made a catastrophic error. You investigate fraud for the state, he whispered. The words barely made it past his teeth. Yes, David, I do. I investigate financial extortion, wire fraud, and forged legal documents. My voice dropped an octave, losing all traces of conversational warmth. I entered clinical professional mode. Right now, I am looking at a branch manager who is refusing to investigate a reported felony on a $500,000 trust because he thinks a forged power of attorney is just a standard family procedure. So we have two options. You can continue to protect my father, and I will make a phone call to bring 3 state troopers into your lobby to seize your computers. Or you can turn your monitor around and show me the digital metadata for the document submitted at 5 this morning. David swallowed hard. He set the coffee cup down so fast some of the brown liquid sloshed onto his desk. He did not bother wiping it up. He grabbed his mouse and clicked frantically, navigating through the bank internal document portal. The quiet click of the plastic mouse button was the only sound in the room. He spun the large flat-screen monitor around so I could see the interface. Here, he said. His voice was shaking. This is the DocuSign file submitted at 3:15 this morning. It was processed by our automated system at 5:47. I pulled my notebook from my briefcase and stared at the screen. The document looked authentic at first glance. It had my full legal name, my social security number, and a digital signature that closely mimicked my handwriting. It even featured a digital notary seal. They had gone to great lengths to make the theft look legitimate. Open the audit trail, I instructed. David clicked the tab. In digital documents, signing the signature itself is meaningless. The real evidence lives in the audit trail. The metadata records every digital footprint associated with the document creation. It logs the time it was viewed, the time it was signed, and most importantly, the IP address of the device used to execute the signature. I scanned the raw data. The document was created at 2 in the morning. The digital notary seal was applied by a third-party online service that relies on uploaded identification. My father must have used a scan of my old passport he kept in his home safe. I kept reading down the lines of code. There it is, I said, pointing to a string of numbers at the bottom of the screen. The IP address. David leaned in, squinting at the screen. The signature was executed from this IP address, he confirmed. Do you need me to run a geolocation trace on it? I shook my head. I already know where it is from. I did not need a trace. I recognized the numbers instantly. As an investigator, I make it a habit to memorize the digital addresses of the people in my immediate circle. It is a hazard of the job. I stared at the screen while a cold, heavy weight settled in my stomach. The IP address belonged to the residential router in my parents' living room. My father had not just hired a shady lawyer to tie up my funds. He had sat on his own couch in the middle of the night, logged onto his computer, and systematically forged my identity to steal $500,000. He committed a federal crime from the house I grew up in. Print the entire audit log, I told David. Print the forged document, the routing data, and the notary certificate. Certify every single page with your bank stamp. David did not hesitate. He sent the files to the heavy laser printer in the corner of his office. The machine hummed to life, spitting out the pages that would serve as the foundation of my criminal case against my own family. While the printer ran, I pulled out my phone. My mother had told me family came first. My father thought my boring desk job meant I was oblivious to how the real world worked. They had calculated the risks and decided I was an easy target. They assumed I would fold under the pressure of family loyalty. I opened my banking app and looked at the zero balance on my checking account. They had frozen that too, just for good measure. They wanted me entirely destitute. They wanted me desperate enough to crawl back to them and beg for access to my own money. David handed me the stack of stamped papers. I placed them carefully into my briefcase and clicked the brass locks shut. I stood up and looked down at the branch manager. "Keep the freeze on the account, David. Do not let anyone touch that money. If Richard Harrison calls, tell him the fraud department is reviewing the file. Do not tell him I was here." David nodded rapidly. "Yes, Miss Harrison. Absolutely. I will lock it down personally." I walked out of the bank into the bright Texas morning. The heat was already rising off the asphalt, but I felt nothing but ice in my veins. The metadata proved the how and the where. Now I needed to find out the why. My father was arrogant, but he was not stupid. He would not risk federal prison unless he was covering up something catastrophic. I started my car and connected my phone to the dashboard display. I needed to look into Liam. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan and let the engine idle. The Texas heat was already baking the asphalt of the bank parking lot, but the air conditioning blasted cold against my face. I tossed my leather briefcase onto the passenger seat. It landed next to a piece of trash I had forgotten to throw away. It was a crumpled white napkin bearing the gold-embossed logo of the Oak Creek Country Club. That napkin was a leftover artifact from a lunch I had with my brother Liam 3 weeks ago. He had insisted on meeting at the club where my parents paid his monthly dues. During that lunch, he wore a custom linen shirt and ordered a $40 steak while casually asking if I could float him a temporary loan. I paid for my own salad and told him no. I kept that napkin as a silent reminder of his unearned, expensive lifestyle. Liam is 34 years old. He is the golden child of the Harrison family. For the past decade, he has treated life like a casino where our parents always cover his losses. He started a boutique fitness center that went bankrupt in 8 months. He launched a cryptocurrency consulting firm that folded before it even registered a domain name. Every time he failed, my father stepped in to sweep the financial debris under the rug. Liam possessed an uncanny ability to fail upwards, always landing on a fresh pile of our parents' cash. I put the car in gear and drove back to my apartment. I needed access to my state-issued field laptop. The standard consumer databases would not give me the full picture. I needed the secure portals authorized by the Department of Financial Regulation. My apartment is a modest one-bedroom on the south side of Austin. The furniture is practical and the walls are bare. I bought everything inside it with money I earned myself. My parents often criticized my living space, calling it cramped and uninspired. They preferred the sprawling high-ceiling aesthetic of their Dallas suburb home. They believed success was defined by what you could show off to the neighbors. I believe success was defined by never owing anyone a dime. I set my briefcase on the kitchen counter and booted up my encrypted laptop. I pulled the stamped documents David had given me at the bank and laid them flat under the overhead light. I focused on the secondary pages of the forged power of attorney submission. My father had not just frozen the trust. He had included a set of automated wire instructions designed to trigger the moment his legal authority was verified. I typed the destination routing number into my investigative terminal. The system hummed as it queried the banking network. The routing digits belonged to a commercial escrow account held by a regional lender in North Texas. The beneficiary name listed on the transfer was Apex Holdings, LLC. I opened a new window and accessed the Texas Secretary of State Corporate Registry. I ran a search on Apex Holdings. The results populated instantly. The registered agent for the company was Liam Harrison. The primary business address was a mailbox rental store in a high-end shopping district. I leaned closer to the screen. My brother was hiding behind a shell company. I needed to know what the shell was holding. I switched over to the county property tax records and ran a reverse search on the LLC. The database returned a single commercial deed. 2 years ago, Apex Holdings purchased an aging retail strip center on the outskirts of Fort Worth. It was a speculative real estate play in a neighborhood that was supposed to gentrify but never did. I pulled the mortgage history on the property. Liam had financed the purchase through a predatory high-risk commercial lender. He had signed a balloon note meaning the entire principal balance was due in one lump sum after 24 months. I logged into the county court docket to check the current legal status of the property. My screen filled with red text. A notice of substitute trustee sale had been filed 3 days ago. Liam was in default. The commercial lender had initiated hostile foreclosure proceedings. They were preparing to seize the strip center and liquidate the asset. I scrolled down to the legal payoff demand. The exact amount required to halt the foreclosure and cure the default was $495,000, plus late penalties and legal fees. The total came to $512,000. My grandmother had left me a trust fund worth $520,000. The math locked together like the teeth of a steel trap. This was not a random theft. It was a precision strike. My brother had played real estate mogul with toxic debt and lost. When the lender came to collect, he ran crying to our parents. My father looked at the looming financial disaster and decided the easiest solution was to harvest my future to pay for my brother's failure. I pushed my chair back from the kitchen counter. The silence in my apartment felt heavy and suffocating. The psychological warfare of my childhood suddenly crystallized into a hard, undeniable truth. My parents did not view my careful financial planning as a personal achievement. They viewed it as a communal asset. They saw my stability as a shared resource waiting to be tapped whenever Liam created an emergency. My grandmother had set up that trust specifically because she knew how my father operated. She handed me a shield. My father forged my identity to turn that shield into an emergency ATM. The profound betrayal washed over me, leaving a cold, clinical resolve in its wake. They thought I was just the quiet daughter who would absorb the blow to keep the peace. They assumed I would pay the invoice for my seat at the family table without raising my voice. My phone buzzed against the granite countertop. The screen illuminated with a new group message. The chat included me, my mother, and my father. Richard Harrison had just checked his banking portal. He had discovered the trust funds were still locked inside Texas Heritage Bank, despite his forged document. He assumed a clerical error had delayed the wire transfer. He assumed I was currently on the phone with the bank trying to stop it. I unlocked the screen and read his text. Olivia, the bank is holding up the transfer. Tell them to release the freeze immediately. Liam is facing a critical deadline with his property. We had to make a tough executive decision. Your brother's future is worth more than your selfish hoarding. Family helps family. Do the right thing and clear the hold. I stared at the glowing letters. He was not apologizing. He was not explaining. He was demanding. He wrapped his extortion in nostalgia and weaponized guilt. He expected me to willingly sacrifice $500,000 to prove my loyalty to a family that clearly despised me. My mother sent a follow-up text a few seconds later. Please, sweetie, blood is thicker than water. We will figure out a way to pay you back eventually. Just call the manager and approve the paperwork your father sent them. We love you. The audacity of the demand settled deep into my bones. They forged my signature at 2 a.m. They committed a federal offense to bypass my consent. And now when their theft hit a technical snag, they expected me to legally authorize the crime they had just committed against me. They wanted me to become an accessory to my own financial ruin. I did not type a response. Answering a text message would validate their delusion that this was a simple family disagreement. I could not handle this over a cellular connection. Setting genuine boundaries requires looking the people who are using you in the eye and showing them the exact price of their actions. I closed my laptop and slid it into my briefcase. I gathered the bank documents, my state badge, and my car keys. I walked out of my quiet apartment and locked the deadbolt behind me. The drive from Austin to their house in the Dallas suburbs takes roughly 3 hours. I spent every minute of that highway journey building a mental fortress. I reviewed the penal codes for identity theft and bank fraud. I categorized the evidence I had already collected. I prepared myself for the gaslighting, the screaming, and the inevitable threats. I pulled into their pristine concrete driveway just before noon. The lawn was perfectly manicured. My mother's imported rose bushes bloomed along the brick walkway. The house looked like a sanctuary from the outside. It looked like a warm, safe place to grow up. I turned off the ignition and stepped out into the midday heat. I walked up to the heavy oak front door and bypassed the doorbell. I turned the handle and pushed the door open, stepping straight into the ambush. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, sealing me inside the foyer. The climate control was set to a perfect 70 degrees, keeping the suffocating Texas heat at bay. The air carried a thick, familiar sweetness. My mother was baking her signature cinnamon rolls. That scent used to represent safety and warmth during my childhood. It was the smell of Saturday mornings and holiday gatherings. Today it functioned as a calculated prop. The nostalgic aroma was designed to soften the edges of the extortion waiting for me down the hall. I walked across the pristine hardwood floors toward the back of the house. The layout was designed for high society entertaining. The kitchen opened directly into an expansive living room featuring cathedral ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows. Standing around the sprawling marble island were the 3 people who had spent the early hours of the morning trying to drain my future. My mother wore a spotless white apron over her tailored blouse. My father leaned against the granite counter holding a ceramic coffee mug. My brother sat on a leather bar stool tapping his fingers against the stone surface. They did not look like conspirators caught executing a federal crime. They looked like a unified front waiting for an erratic child to finish throwing an unreasonable tantrum. "Ah, there she is," my father said. He took a slow sip of his coffee. His tone was casual, projecting the unearned confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. "I knew you would come to your senses and drive up here." I stopped a few feet away from the island. I did not drop my briefcase. I did not offer a greeting. I simply stared at the 3 of them, letting the silence stretch until the ambient hum of the refrigerator felt deafening. Susan wiped her hands on a dish towel and stepped around the counter. She offered a warm, practiced smile that did not reach her eyes. "Olivia, sweetheart, let us just sit down and talk this through. You are acting so defensive, and it is making everyone tense. We are your family. Blood is thicker than water. Just give me your phone." She reached out with both hands, aiming straight for my suit pocket. It was a classic maternal maneuver designed to disarm me under the guise of keeping the peace. If she took my device, she could open my banking application, dial the branch manager, and try to force a verbal authorization while Richard loomed over my shoulder. I took a sharp step backward. "Do not touch me," I said. My voice was quiet, but it possessed a sharp edge that made her freeze. Susan blinked in mock hurt, pressing a hand to her chest. "There is no need to be so hostile. We are trying to fix a misunderstanding. Your brother is in a tight spot, and we had to make a quick decision. You were asleep. We knew you would want to help him if you understood the stakes." The audacity of her narrative was staggering. They were actively rewriting a felony into a minor administrative oversight. This was the native language of our household. In families where chaos reigns, the competent child is never celebrated. Their competence merely becomes a communal asset. Liam shifted uncomfortably on his stool. He ran a hand through his expensive haircut. "Come on, Liv," he muttered. "The lender is breathing down my neck. If I do not wire that money by Friday, they foreclose on the retail center. I lose everything. You have $500,000 just sitting in an account doing nothing. It is greedy to hold on to it when I am drowning." I shifted my gaze to my brother. "Your commercial real estate failures are not my responsibility, Liam. I did not co-sign your toxic debt. I did not tell you to buy a failing strip mall. The trust grandmother left me is not your emergency bailout fund. Richard slammed his coffee mug onto the marble counter. The ceramic clattered loudly, echoing against the high ceilings. That is enough, he snapped. His face flushed red with sudden indignation. He abandoned the casual patriarch routine and stepped forward. We are not asking for your permission anymore, Olivia. I filed the paperwork. I am your father, and I made an executive call for the survival of this family. You forged a legal document, I corrected him, keeping my voice entirely level. You logged onto your residential router at 3 a.m, falsified a notary seal, and digitally signed my name to a durable power of attorney. You committed a severe state and federal crime. My father let out a short, barking laugh. He crossed his arms over his chest, puffing himself up to his full height. He looked down at me with pure, unadulterated contempt. He was handing me the exact invoice for my seat at the Thanksgiving table. Do not quote the law to me, little girl, he scoffed. I paid for the roof over your head for 18 years. I funded your braces. I bought your first car. Family helps family. You owe us this money. No judge in this state is going to arrest a respected businessman for moving funds around inside his own family to save his son. It is a victimless action. You are overreacting because you have always been jealous of your brother. I refuse to match his rising volume. I refuse to scream or slam doors. Genuine boundaries do not require violent severing. They require the diamond-hard courage to look at the people using you and accept their terms. It is not a victimless action, I replied. Identity theft carries a mandatory minimum sentence. Wire fraud crossing state banking lines carries even more. I possess the digital metadata proving the exact computer terminal you used to execute the signature. I have the timestamps and the IP address. Richard waved his hand in the air, swatting away my facts like they were annoying insects. He leaned closer, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate me. You are bluffing. You would never call the cops on your own blood. What are you going to do, Olivia? Go run to your little agency. File a complaint. It is just a desk job. You shuffle papers for the government. You do not have the power or the guts to take down your own father. He was leaning heavily on the uniquely American myth that family acts as an unconditional safety net. He genuinely believed that our shared DNA granted him permanent immunity from consequence. He viewed my career in the same way he viewed my finances. He thought it was weak, easily manipulated, and ultimately subordinate to his authority. I looked at Susan. She was nodding along with her husband, wearing a smug expression. I looked at Liam, who was checking his gold watch, clearly bored by the legal semantics. None of them viewed me as a human being. I was just an obstacle standing between them and the cash they felt entitled to spend. A cold realization settled over me as I watched their coordinated arrogance. Richard was entirely too confident. A man does not commit high-level wire fraud for the first time with this much casual swagger. The ease with which he stole my identity suggested a chilling familiarity with the process. If he felt comfortable enough to hijack a $500,000 trust using my personal data, what else had he done in the dark? I adjusted my grip on my briefcase. You are right about one thing, Richard, I said softly. I am not going to stand here and argue with you. Susan smiled, thinking she had won. See, that is my sensible girl. Now just call the bank manager and tell him to release the hold. I will box up some cinnamon rolls for you to take back to Austin. I did not break eye contact with my father. I turned around and walked toward the heavy oak door. I did not say another word. I stepped out into the blistering heat, climbed into my car, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. The instinct of a seasoned investigator had just kicked in. I pulled my state laptop out of my bag and rested it on the steering wheel. Richard assumed my job was just shuffling papers. He was about to find out what a senior fraud investigator can uncover when she turns her full access on her own bloodline. If they forged my signature to take money out, I needed to know if they had ever used my name to bring money in. I opened a secure terminal and began a deep-level sweep of my own social security number, preparing to hunt through the shadows of my father's financial history. Before I reached the driver's side door of my sedan, I paused. The midday sun beat down on the concrete driveway, radiating a thick, suffocating heat. Right next to the edge of the pristine garage sat a blue municipal recycling bin. My father always demanded perfection from the landscaping, but the lid of the container was pushed open by an overflowing stack of discarded paper. A heavy, glossy postcard rested near the top of the pile. The bold red lettering caught my eye. I reached down and pulled the card from the bin. It was a pre-approval notice from Vanguard Commercial Credit. They are a notorious high-risk lending group known for predatory interest rates and aggressive collection tactics. My stomach tightened when I read the mailing label. The advertisement was not addressed to my father or my brother. It bore my name, Olivia Harrison, Olivia. I stared at the glossy paper. I have never resided at this Dallas address. I have lived in Austin for a decade. Commercial lenders use targeted algorithms pulling data from recent inquiries and active trade lines. Vanguard Commercial Credit only sends mailers to individuals who have recently secured high-risk business financing. I opened my car door and slid into the driver's seat. I turned the ignition and blasted the air conditioning, aiming the vents directly at my face. My hands felt unnervingly steady. The emotional shock of the morning was gone, replaced by a cold, mechanical focus. I placed the junk mail on the passenger seat next to the country club napkin. I opened my field laptop and rested it against the steering wheel. I tapped my thumb against the biometric scanner. The screen glowed to life, displaying the secure portal of the Texas State Department of Financial Regulation. My father believed he had orchestrated a clever temporary freeze on my inheritance. He thought his forged paperwork was isolated to a single bank. He failed to comprehend the scope of my daily work. I do not rely on standard consumer credit reports. I have authorized access to deep-level financial tracking systems designed to uncover hidden assets and illegal money movement. I bypassed the standard public records interface and logged into the restricted commercial registry. I typed my own Social Security number into the search bar. I selected the parameters for all originations inquiries and guaranteed liabilities filed within the last 90 days. I hit the Enter key and watched the progress bar inch across the screen. The silence inside the car was heavy. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the forced air rattling through the dashboard vents. The database returned a single positive match. My eyes scanned the digital ledger. 3 weeks ago, a new commercial trade line was opened in my name. The principal balance was $150,000. I clicked on the linked document to open the origin file. The screen populated with a scanned copy of a commercial promissory note. The primary borrower was listed as Apex Holdings, LLC, the exact same shell company my brother used to hide his failing retail center. The corporate entity did not possess the necessary revenue to secure further financing on its own. Liam was drowning in toxic debt and no legitimate bank would touch him. To bypass the underwriting requirements, the lender demanded a personal guarantor with flawless credit and a stable, verifiable income. I scrolled down to the signature page. There was my printed name followed by a digital signature nearly identical to the one used on the forged trust documents. My father had used my identity to co-sign a predatory business loan. The terms were brutal. The note carried an 18% interest rate with a default clause that allowed immediate wage garnishment. This was no longer a simple case of a frozen trust fund. The dynamic of being the designated emergency ATM had mutated into outright financial destruction. I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes. The puzzle pieces locked together, forming a terrifying picture of my family. 3 weeks ago, Liam faced a critical cash shortage. Richard stole my identity to secure a fast, high-interest loan, keeping Apex Holdings afloat for a few more days. But the $150,000 was just a temporary bandage. The commercial lender holding the primary mortgage still demanded their $500,000 balloon payment. When the first stolen loan proved insufficient, my father escalated his crime. He went after the trust grandmother left me. He used my name to borrow money and then tried to use my inheritance to pay off the debt. If I had simply surrendered and let them take the trust, I would still be legally bound to this secondary commercial note. When Liam inevitably defaulted on his strip mall, the predatory lenders would have come straight for me. They would have filed a judgment in county court. They would have garnished my paychecks. The true gravity of their betrayal hit me. My job at the state agency requires a pristine financial record. A default judgment involving a high-risk commercial shell company would trigger an automatic internal affairs review. I would lose my security clearance. I would lose my career. My father did not just attempt to drain my savings account. He actively chained me to a sinking ship. He was willing to destroy my professional reputation, my livelihood, and my future just to buy his golden child a few more months of pretending to be a successful entrepreneur. In our society, we are often conditioned to view setting boundaries as an act of hostility. We are told that walking away is a loud, violent severing of ties. But sitting in that freezing car, I realized the truth. Genuine boundaries are astonishingly quiet. The real violence does not happen in screaming matches. It happens in the dark. It is a forged signature processed at 3 in the morning. It is a parent smiling at you across a marble kitchen island knowing they just sold your future to a debt collector. Love holding a hidden balance sheet is not love at all. It is extortion. My parents had handed me the terms of my existence in their family. I was nothing more than a designated shock absorber expected to absorb the impact of their terrible choices. I opened my eyes and sat up straight. The grief evaporated. It calcified into a clinical diamond-hard courage. I was done being the victim of their financial chaos. I was the senior fraud investigator for the state of Texas, and they had just handed me a flawless paper trail of multiple felonies. I created a new encrypted folder on my desktop and named it State of Texas versus Richard Harrison. I exported the commercial promissory note. I downloaded the digital audit trail containing the IP address from the trust forgery. I pulled the incorporation documents for Apex Holdings. I cross-referenced the dates, the times, and the monetary values. I built a comprehensive evidence file with the same cold precision I used to dismantle money laundering syndicates. I transformed every shred of their betrayal into a tangible legal weapon. I detached the laptop from the steering wheel mount and placed it inside my leather briefcase. I locked the brass clasps and put the vehicle in drive. I navigated out of the wealthy suburban neighborhood, leaving behind the pristine lawns and the illusion of a safe sanctuary. I merged onto the southbound interstate heading back toward Austin. I needed to draft the official affidavits and prepare the warrants. I needed to organize the data so perfectly that no judge could deny the severity of the crimes. 10 miles down the highway, my phone vibrated in the cup holder. I glanced at the screen. The caller ID showed a picture of my Aunt Laura. She is my father's younger sister and the primary gossip conduit for our entire extended family. She rarely calls me unless she needs technical support for her computer or wants to complain about her neighbors. I let the call roll to voicemail. A minute later, a notification appeared indicating she had left an audio message. I tapped the screen and played the recording through the car speakers. Laura sounded breathless and dramatic. "Olivia, honey, I just got off the phone with your mother. She is in tears. We are all so worried about you. Richard said you came over to the house today acting erratic and making paranoid accusations about the bank. He thinks the stress of your job is causing some kind of mental break. Please call me back, sweetie. We want to get you some help before you do something you regret." I gripped the steering wheel as the recording ended. My parents had realized their intimidation tactics in the kitchen failed. They knew I was walking away, so they executed a preemptive strike. They were launching a calculated smear campaign to control the narrative. They wanted to brand me as unstable to discredit any legal claims I might make. The war had officially moved beyond the walls of their house. I pressed the accelerator, pushing the car faster down the empty stretch of Texas asphalt. I welcomed the escalation. Let them spin their web of lies. Let them tell the whole family I was crazy. They were about to learn that facts do not care about family gossip. The miles of Texas highway stretched out ahead of me, while Aunt Laura's voice echoed in the enclosed cabin of my car. I listened to the recording a second time. My aunt sounded breathless and frantic, claiming my mother was in tears. Then came the specific phrase designed to plant a seed of doubt. "Are you off your medication, sweetie?" I do not take medication. I have never been prescribed medication for any psychiatric condition. That specific detail was a calculated fabrication. My parents were weaving a narrative designed to strip away my credibility. By suggesting I was unhinged and off prescribed pills, they were providing the extended family with a convenient excuse to dismiss anything I said. My phone vibrated again. Then it buzzed 3 more times in rapid succession. The digital onslaught had begun. I tapped the screen and glanced at the incoming notifications. My cousin Mark texted me asking why I was hoarding family money when Liam was facing a crisis. Uncle David sent a lengthy message urging me to seek counseling. He wrote that Richard and Susan were terrified I was having a manic episode and imagining financial fraud out of sheer paranoia. The coordination was impressive. Within an hour of me leaving their Dallas home, my parents had activated the entire Harrison family network. They were conducting a preemptive strike to control the narrative before I could file a police report. In their version of events, my father was a noble patriarch trying to save his son, while I was the unstable, greedy daughter inventing crimes to punish them. I kept my eyes on the road. The setting sun cast long shadows across the dry landscape. A heavy, unsettling silence filled the car. It was the silence of a shattered illusion. For years, I thought my extended family might secretly understand the toxic dynamic of my household. I hoped they saw the favoritism and the subtle extortion. Now I realized they were entirely complicit. They preferred the comfortable lie of a unified, successful family over the ugly truth of my father's financial crimes. They were flying monkeys executing the will of the patriarch. If I went to the authorities, my parents could point to this chorus of relatives who would willingly testify that I was delusional. It was a psychological tactic designed to isolate me and make me question my own reality. Most people facing this kind of orchestrated character assassination would exhaust themselves trying to fight back. They would type frantic paragraphs defending their sanity. They would call Uncle David and scream into the receiver demanding to be heard. They would beg the people who were using them to finally see the truth. I did none of those things. Defending myself would only give them the friction they craved. It would validate their narrative that I was acting erratically. Instead, I recognized their smear campaign for exactly what it was. It was evidence. I pulled over at a rest stop just outside the Austin city limits. The parking lot was empty except for a few idling long-haul trucks. I put my vehicle in park and reached for my phone. I took screenshots of every text message from Mark and Uncle David. I saved the audio file of Aunt Laura asking about the non-existent medication. I documented the timestamps of every incoming communication. My parents thought they were building a wall of social pressure to keep me silent. In reality, they were providing me with a flawless paper trail of their own consciousness of guilt. Innocent people do not launch a coordinated family-wide panic attack within an hour of a disagreement. Only cornered criminals engage in witness tampering. I transferred the digital files from my phone to the encrypted folder on my field laptop. I categorized the new evidence under a subfolder titled Intent and Isolation Tactics. I treated the data with cold, clinical detachment. I was no longer an injured daughter mourning the loss of a family. I was a state investigator building an airtight indictment. I merged back onto the highway and drove the final stretch into Austin. By the time I unlocked the door to my apartment, the sun had fully set. The space was dark and quiet. I walked into the kitchen and set my leather briefcase on the granite counter. I spent the next 3 hours organizing the State of Texas versus Richard Harrison file. I paired the forged trust document from the bank with the digital metadata proving the origin IP address. I placed the fraudulent $150,000 commercial promissory note right next to it. Finally, I added the collection of voicemails and text messages proving my parents were actively trying to silence their victim. The picture was damning. It showed a desperate man stealing $500,000, leveraging his daughter's identity for toxic debt, and then weaponizing his relatives to cover his tracks. The narrative was tight, logical, and supported by undeniable mathematical proof. I closed the laptop and walked into my bedroom. The exhaustion of the day finally caught up with me. but sleep felt distant. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. The ghost of the family I always wished I had lingered in the quiet corners of the room. I thought about the holidays I would never attend again, and the empty chair at their dining table. But the sadness was hollow. The people sitting at that table did not love me. They loved the convenience of my silence. I set my alarm for 6 in the morning. Tomorrow was Monday. The state offices would be open. I was going to walk into the Texas State Department of Financial Regulation and hand the complete file over to the state prosecutors. I was going to turn the invisible violence of my childhood into a very public legal reckoning. Morning arrived with a bright, unforgiving glare. I put on my sharpest navy suit. I secured my hair, tied my shoes, and picked up my briefcase. I felt a diamond-hard courage settling in my chest as I drove downtown toward the agency headquarters. The fear of their retaliation was gone. The invoice for my seat at their table had been rejected. I parked in the secure underground garage and rode the elevator to the investigative floor. The doors parted, revealing the familiar hum of government efficiency. Analysts typed at their terminals and field agents discussed ongoing cases over coffee. I walked down the central corridor toward the prosecutor liaison office. My plan was simple: hand over the evidence, recuse myself from the investigation due to the conflict of interest, and let the justice system dismantle Richard Harrison. I turned the corner, heading toward my desk to print a hard copy of the index. I stopped dead in my tracks. My office door was wide open. Sitting behind my desk was Director Hayes. He is the head of the Financial Crimes Division. He is a man who rarely leaves his corner suite unless a crisis of significant proportions has landed on his desk. He was not looking at the morning reports. He was staring at the blinking red light on my desk phone. That light indicates a recorded priority transfer from the Internal Affairs Division. Director Hayes looked up and met my eyes. The expression on his face told me everything I needed to know. My father had not stopped at calling out Laura. Richard Harrison had decided to take his smear campaign out of the family group chat and bring it directly to my employer. He thought he could outmaneuver me by striking at the very foundation of my independence. Olivia, closed the door, the director said. His voice was grim. We need to listen to a phone call your father just made to the State Ethics Board. I closed the door. The heavy wood shut out the ambient noise of the investigative floor, leaving only the low hum of the ceiling vents. Director Hayes did not move from my chair. He sat with his hands folded, resting on the edge of my desk. His eyes remained fixed on the blinking red light of the telephone console. That small, pulsing indicator represented a formal inquiry from the Internal Affairs Division. My father had crossed a fatal boundary. He had taken his private extortion and broadcast it to the governing body that holds my professional license. He believed he could bully me into submission by threatening my livelihood. He thought a state regulatory agency operated like a country club where he could simply demand to speak to the manager and have an unruly employee reprimanded. Sit down, Olivia, Hayes instructed. His voice was flat, carrying the measured cadence of a man who has spent 3 decades prosecuting white-collar criminals. I took the guest chair in my own office. I placed my leather briefcase on my lap, keeping my hands steady. This call came into the ethics hotline 20 minutes ago, Hayes said. The intake officer flagged it and sent it directly to my desk because it involves a senior investigator. I want you to listen very carefully. He reached across the desk and pressed the speaker button. A harsh electronic beep echoed in the room, followed by the unmistakable baritone of my father. Richard Harrison sounded angry, but he was trying to mask it beneath a veneer of concerned paternal authority. My name is Richard Harrison, he began. I am calling to file an emergency formal complaint against one of your agents. Olivia Harrison. She is my daughter. Early this morning, she abused her state credentials to unlawfully freeze a family trust account at Texas Heritage Bank. We are in the middle of a private financial transition. I hold the durable power of attorney over those assets. Instead of respecting the legal paperwork, she stormed into the branch, flashed her badge, and intimidated the bank manager into locking down $500,000 of my money. She is having a psychological episode and using her government position to carry out a personal vendetta. She needs to be suspended immediately before she does any more damage to our family business." The recording ended with another sharp beep. The silence in the office felt thick. For a brief, terrible moment, the conditioned responses of my childhood flared up. A wave of panic washed over me. This was the ultimate retaliation. My father was trying to strip away the career I had built with my own hands. He wanted me unemployed, discredited, and entirely dependent on his mercy. He wanted to force me back into the role of the designated shock absorber. Hayes leaned back in my chair. He steepled his fingers and studied my face. He did not look angry. He looked analytical. "Is there a $500,000 trust account?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. My voice was calm. "It was established by my late grandmother. The funds belong exclusively to me." "Did you go to Texas Heritage Bank this morning and display your credentials to a branch manager?" "Yes, I did. I went to report a felony." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "What kind of felony?" I unlatched the brass locks on my briefcase. The sharp click echoed in the quiet room. I pulled out the thick stack of printed evidence I had compiled the night before. I stood up and laid the documents flat on the desk right next to the blinking telephone. "At 3 a.m, my father logged onto his residential router in Dallas," I explained. "He forged a digital notary seal and faked my signature on a durable power of attorney. He submitted it to the bank to bypass my consent and seize the trust. The metadata proving the exact IP address is on the second page." When the branch manager refused to investigate the irregular filing, I produced my state identification to compel him to pull the digital audit trail. Hayes picked up the stamped bank records. His eyes darted across the lines of code, absorbing the digital footprint. He did not stop there. I continued pulling the next file from my bag. 3 weeks ago, Richard Harrison used my identity to secure a high-risk commercial promissory note for my brother. He forged my name to guarantee a $150,000 loan. The paperwork for that transaction is right there. I watched my supervisor read the predatory loan agreement. I had walked into this building prepared to defend my integrity. I had been ready to fight for my job. But watching Hayes trace the timeline of the documents, a profound realization hit me. I did not need to defend myself. My father thought he was executing a brilliant tactical strike by calling internal affairs. He assumed the agency would panic at the mention of a rogue investigator and fire me on the spot. He severely misunderstood how the justice system operates. Hayes set the papers down and looked at the blinking red light on the phone. A slow, grim realization settled over his features. "Olivia," he said softly, "do you realize what your father just did?" "He tried to get me fired," I said. No, Hayes corrected, tapping the telephone console. "He just handed us his own head on a silver platter." The beautiful irony of the situation bloomed in the room. By dialing a recorded state ethics hotline, Richard had voluntarily surrendered his right to silence. He had formally placed himself at the center of the financial dispute. He admitted on an official government recording that he was the one attempting to execute the contested power of attorney. He claimed ownership of the funds, providing undeniable proof of his motive. If we had to arrest him based solely on the digital IP address, a clever defense attorney might argue that anyone could have logged onto the home network to forge the document. They might have tried to blame a hacker or even my brother Liam. But Richard could not blame anyone else now. He had called a state law enforcement agency and loudly complained that his scheme was being interrupted. He had authenticated his own crime. "This is an unsolicited confession," Hayes muttered, staring at the speakerphone. He corroborated the time frame. He confirmed his intent to move the assets. And by lying to a state regulatory board to trigger a false investigation, he just added a separate charge of official obstruction to his roster. My father always mocked my career. He called it a boring desk job. He viewed my public service as a mundane clerical role far beneath his own status as a wealthy suburban patriarch. His blinding arrogance prevented him from understanding the lethal efficiency of the bureaucracy he despised. He thought he was calling the manager to complain about bad service. Instead, he had walked directly into an interrogation room and confessed to the detectives. My boring desk job had just become the executioner of his pristine reputation. I was actually on my way to your office to hand this over, I told Hayes. I need to formally recuse myself from the investigation. The conflict of interest is obvious. I am the victim on the forged documents. Hayes nodded slowly. He reached for his reading glasses and slipped them on. You are right. You cannot run the active trace on these accounts. I will assign a separate agent to lead the prosecution team. But before you step out of the room, I need to ask you about this specific commercial loan. He slid the glossy commercial credit paperwork across the desk, separating it from the trust documents. His finger tapped against the section listing the primary borrower. Your brother is Liam Harrison. Yes, I answered, feeling a sudden shift in the atmosphere. The satisfaction of my father making a fatal error was instantly replaced by a new cold tension. Hayes dragged his finger across the page, underlining the name of the shell company. And Liam is the registered agent for Apex Holdings. That is correct, I said. He used it to purchase a retail strip center in Fort Worth. It is currently facing a hostile foreclosure due to a balloon payment default. That is why they needed my $500,000. They were trying to bail out the property. Hayes stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. He took his glasses off and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at me with an expression that was no longer just analytical. It was deadly serious. Olivia, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Apex Holdings is not just a failed real estate venture. I stood frozen. A new major conflict was unfolding right in front of me, tearing through the narrative I had built in my head. Hayes reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a small brass key. He unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk, the one reserved for highly sensitive active warrants. He pulled out a thick manila folder and dropped it onto the wood surface. A stark red restricted watermark stamped across the cover glared up at me. We have been looking at Apex Holdings for the last 8 months, Hayes said. We did not know the registered agent was your brother. He is using a registered proxy service out of Delaware to mask the true ownership structure. But we know what the company does. What does it do? I asked. My throat felt incredibly dry. Hayes flipped the folder open. It is a front. The retail strip center is a physical wash plant. Apex Holdings is a mid-level money laundering operation moving illicit funds through fake commercial leases. Your brother is not a failed entrepreneur, Olivia. He is cleaning dirty money for a criminal syndicate. The air in the office vanished. My parents had not just tried to steal my inheritance to save a failing business. By forging the power of attorney and attempting to wire my $520,000 into that specific holding account, they had unwittingly attempted to fund a monitored criminal enterprise. They had walked straight into a multi-agency state investigation. I stared at the thick manila folder resting on my desk. The stark red restricted watermark stamped diagonally across the cover seemed to bleed into the beige paper. The silence in my office stretched into a long, suffocating vacuum. Director Hayes did not look away. He waited for my analytical mind to process the paradigm shift. My brother was not an incompetent businessman. The entire narrative of my childhood was a carefully constructed facade. Open it, Hayes instructed. His voice maintained that flat, clinical cadence. I reached across the desk and flipped the heavy cardstock cover. Inside a labyrinth of financial flowcharts detailed the anatomy of a sophisticated criminal network. The diagrams tracked millions of dollars moving through phantom entities across the state of Texas. I traced the black ink lines with my index finger, connecting the dots between cash-intensive businesses and offshore holding accounts. Right in the center of the web sat Apex Holdings. Liam used a registered proxy service in Delaware to shield his name from public commercial registries, Hayes explained, pointing to a clustered node on the chart. That is why standard consumer sweeps never flagged him. But our joint task force breached the proxy wall last October. Apex Holdings owns the Fort Worth Retail Center on paper. In reality, the property serves as a physical wash plant for a cartel-affiliated distribution ring. The pieces of my brother's life snapped together with chilling clarity. Liam had never possessed the discipline to run a legitimate enterprise. 10 years ago, he opened a boutique fitness center that supposedly went bankrupt. 5 years ago, he launched a cryptocurrency consulting firm that folded almost overnight. Our parents always framed these ventures as the ambitious risks of a budding entrepreneur. They bailed him out when the ledgers collapsed. I looked up at my supervisor. Those were wash plants too, I said. The gym and the crypto firm. He was running test models, learning how to clean illicit cash through retail fronts. Hayes nodded grimly. He learned the mechanics and scaled up. Apex Holdings was his masterstroke. The strip center houses 5 commercial tenants: a nail salon, a pawn shop, a discount cellular retailer, a laundromat, and a cash-only diner. All 5 businesses are shell operations. They generate fake invoices for services never rendered, allowing the syndicate to deposit duffel bags of dirty street currency into legitimate banking channels. They pay rent to Apex Holdings, cleaning the capital. I felt a cold shiver trace the line of my spine. The stakes had just skyrocketed from a petty suburban inheritance dispute into the realm of organized crime. Why is the property in foreclosure? I asked, tracing the flowchart toward the high-risk lender. If he is washing millions for a syndicate, he should have limitless capital. He got greedy, Hayes replied, turning to the next page of the dossier. 6 months ago, the federal authorities cracked down on the primary distribution routes along the border. The cartel cash flow dried up. The shell tenants could not pay their inflated rent. But Liam still owed a balloon payment to his commercial lender. I looked closely at the lending documents. The puzzle completed itself. The predatory lender Vanguard Commercial Credit was not a legitimate financial institution either. They are shadow bankers, I whispered. Exactly, Hayes said, leaning forward. The syndicate fronted Liam the initial capital to buy the retail center through Vanguard. It was a closed-loop system, but when Liam stopped generating clean revenue, the shadow bank initiated a hostile foreclosure to reclaim their asset. If they seize the property, Liam owes the cartel $500,000. And those are not people who take a borrower to civil court. They extract payment through other means. My mind reeled, processing the sheer magnitude of the trap my parents had walked into. Richard and Susan thought they were saving their golden child from a mundane real estate failure. They believed they were rescuing a struggling entrepreneur. If my father had succeeded, I stated, keeping my tone devoid of emotion. If the bank had processed the forged power of attorney and wired my $520,000 into the Apex Holdings escrow account. Hayes finished the thought. If that wire cleared, Richard and Susan Harrison would have injected clean, stolen capital directly into a monitored money laundering operation to satisfy a cartel debt. They would have crossed the threshold from state-level identity theft to federal criminal conspiracy. My parents had unwittingly tied themselves to a major syndicate. The audacity of their greed had blinded them to the reality of their son. They assumed my careful financial planning was a communal asset waiting to be harvested. They tried to throw my life savings into a black hole to cover a debt owed to dangerous men. And they used my name on the secondary commercial note, I added, feeling a sudden surge of adrenaline. If this task force raided Apex Holdings while my name was attached to the guarantor paperwork, I would have been indicted right alongside them. Hayes closed the restricted folder. That is why your father calling the ethics hotline is the final nail in their coffin. By officially claiming ownership of the funds and admitting he executed the transfer, he exonerated you on a recorded government line. He built an ironclad defense for your innocence while simultaneously sealing his own federal indictment. The poetic justice of the situation felt heavy and final. My father thought my state position was a boring desk job. He thought the law was a flexible concept designed to yield to wealthy suburbanites. He was about to discover that the justice system operates with a cold mechanical precision that does not care about country club memberships or manicured lawns. What happens now? I asked. We move the timeline up, Hayes answered, checking his watch. The joint task force was preparing to seize the Apex Holdings assets next month. But given the immediate threat to your safety and the new evidence of wire fraud, we are accelerating the operation. You are officially recused from the financial analysis. However, since Liam and your parents do not know we are watching, you are now our primary witness. I stood up and smoothed the front of my gray suit. I accept the terms. Before Hayes could outline the procedural steps, my cell phone vibrated inside my pocket. The sudden hum felt jarring in the quiet office. I pulled the device out and glanced at the glowing screen. It was a text message from Liam. Liv, I know things got heated at the house. Dad went too far. I want to make this right. Can we meet for coffee, just the two of us? I have a proposal that will get you out of the commercial loan and fix this mess. Do not tell Mom and Dad. I stared at the text. My brother was desperate. The syndicate was closing in on him, and his initial plan to steal my trust had stalled. He was reaching out for a clandestine meeting, playing the role of the sympathetic sibling. He wanted to offer a transactional deal. He was walking directly into the crosshairs of a state investigator holding all the cards. I turned the phone screen around so Director Hayes could read the message. The corners of the director's mouth twitched upward in a grim, calculating smile. It looks like your brother wants to negotiate, Hayes said softly. I put the phone back in my pocket. Let us set up the wire. I'm going to let him talk. The technical surveillance unit operates out of a windowless room on the 4th floor of the agency headquarters. It took a technician exactly 7 minutes to thread a high-fidelity microphone beneath my silk blouse and secure the transmitter against my ribs using cold medical tape. Director Hayes stood by the door watching the calibration process. We established a distress signal. If I touched my collarbone, the tactical team parked 2 blocks away would move in. But the true danger was not physical. The danger lay in sitting across from a man raised in the same house as me, knowing I was about to record his final ruin. Liam picked a location far outside his usual wealthy Dallas perimeter. He texted me the address of a rundown diner situated on a dusty access road near Waco, halfway between our respective cities. It was the kind of establishment that served burnt coffee and catered to weary truck drivers. The isolation was intentional. He wanted a neutral ground where his high society friends would never see him begging his sister for money. I arrived 10 minutes early and slid into a cracked vinyl booth near the back. The air smelled of stale grease and industrial bleach. At precisely 2 in the afternoon, the bell above the door jingled. Liam walked inside. For the first time in a decade, my brother looked his actual age. His designer suit hung loosely around his shoulders, and dark circles bruised the delicate skin under his eyes. The effortless golden child persona had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, desperate shell. He slid into the booth across from me. He rested his hands on the cheap laminate surface. The heavy gold links of his $10,000 Rolex watch clicked rhythmically against the peeling formica. Tap, tap, tap. The nervous metallic sound provided a steady metronome to the extortion that was about to unfold. He ordered black coffee from a passing waitress. He waited until she walked away before leaning forward. He tried to assemble a warm, familiar smile, but his facial muscles betrayed the strain. "Thank you for coming, Liv," he started. His voice carried a manufactured softness. "I know yesterday was ugly. Dad lost his temper and crossed a line. I never wanted it to go that far." I sat perfectly still, letting the hidden microphone capture the ambient noise of the diner bridging the silence between us. I did not offer forgiveness. "You were always the smart one," Liam continued, attempting to weaponize our childhood. "Do you remember when we were kids and I broke that window in the garage? You took the blame because you knew Dad would go easy on you. You always protected me. I need you to protect me one last time." His eyes welled with moisture. It was a practiced theatrical display. The tears were designed to trigger a deeply ingrained sisterly instinct. He wanted me to view him as the helpless sibling rather than a mid-level money launderer working for a criminal syndicate. "What exactly do you need protection from, Liam?" I asked, keeping my tone flat and inquisitive. The agency required him to explicitly state his demands on the recording. He swallowed hard. The tapping of his expensive watch against the table accelerated. "I am in a bad spot with the Fort Worth property. The lenders are not standard bankers. They are aggressive. If I do not clear the default by the end of the week, I am going to lose everything. They might even come after me personally." I rested my hands on my lap, far away from my collarbone. "And how does my frozen trust account solve your problem?" He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. If you authorize the release of that $520,000, I can pay off the property debt. I can get these people off my back. But I know you are angry about what Dad did, so I want to offer you a trade." He paused, letting the word hang in the greasy air. "A trade," I echoed. "Yes," he said, nodding rapidly. "I know about the Vanguard commercial credit note, the $150,000 loan Dad put in your name to keep my holding company afloat last month." The admission flowed from his mouth with chilling ease. He was openly acknowledging his complicity in the first layer of identity theft. He was confirming that my father had forged my signature and that Liam had eagerly accepted the stolen funds. The hidden transmitter taped to my ribs secured another felony charge for the state prosecutor. "I am listening," I replied. Liam wiped a fake tear from the corner of his eye and played his final card. "It is extortion wrapped in nostalgia. If you call Texas Heritage Bank right now and verbally approve the power of attorney Dad filed, I will personally take care of the Vanguard loan. I will restructure the debt and remove your name as the guarantor. You will be free and clear of the commercial liability. I will give you back your pristine credit rating. We can put all of this behind us and be a family again." The sheer psychological impact of his proposal settled over the booth. He was attempting to hold my stolen identity hostage to force my compliance on the larger theft. He wanted me to voluntarily surrender $500,000 just to escape the predatory shadow bankers he had already chained to my neck. He framed this financial hostage negotiation as an act of brotherly compromise. The major conflict was no longer about his words. The true battle was entirely internal. I possessed the agonizing knowledge that he was not just a failed businessman making a desperate play. He was a pawn for a cartel. If I gave him what he wanted, the syndicate would devour my grandmother's legacy, and he would still end up in federal prison. But beyond the legal reality, a deeper emotional truth crystallized in my mind. My brother did not care if I lost everything. He did not care if the shadow lenders ruined my career. He only cared about saving his own skin. He was willing to use my hard-earned stability as a human shield. I looked at the gold watch circling his wrist. He wore a timepiece worth $10,000 while begging his sister to sacrifice her entire future to pay his debts. He was handing me the exact terms of my continued membership in the Harrison family. "Liam," I said, keeping my voice low and steady, "you do not have the power to restructure a high-risk commercial loan held by a shadow lender. You are broke. The Vanguard note is in default. The trust fund is the only liquid asset left, and you want me to hand it over to criminals." His eyes widened. The fake warmth vanished, replaced by genuine panic. "What are you talking about?" "You talking?" I did not break eye contact. "I am talking about your holding company, Apex Holdings. I am talking about the forged documents Dad submitted from his home router. I am talking about the reality that you both committed multiple felonies." He recoiled, pressing his back against the vinyl booth. The metallic tapping of his watch stopped. "Liv, you do not understand. These lenders, they are not going to just send a collection notice. If I do not pay them, they are going to hurt me. You have to give me the money." His voice cracked, shedding the last layer of his golden child persona. He was no longer negotiating, he was begging. I felt a strange, profound sense of peace wash over me. For 32 years, I had been conditioned to view my own boundaries as an act of hostility against my family. I had been taught that walking away was a loud, violent severing of ties. But sitting in that diner, I realized setting a boundary requires no screaming matches. It just requires the diamond-hard courage to look at the people who are using you, acknowledge the price of their affection, and walk out the door. "Your debts are your own, Liam," I stated. The words felt heavy and final. "I will not authorize the trust transfer. I will not rescue your holding company, and I will not pay the invoice for a seat at a table where I am only valued for the money I can provide. I accept your terms for my departure from this family." I slid out of the booth and stood up. "Liv, wait," he hissed, grabbing the edge of the table. "You cannot do this. Blood is thicker than water." I looked down at him one last time. "You should have thought about that before you let Dad forge my signature." I turned my back and walked toward the exit. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully as I stepped out into the blinding Texas sunlight. The oppressive heat hit my face, but my lungs drew in a deep, full breath of clean air. I walked across the gravel parking lot toward my unmarked sedan. I opened the driver's side door and climbed inside. Before I could even turn the key in the ignition, my cell phone vibrated. I answered the call without checking the caller identification. "We have it all," Director Hayes said through the vehicle speakers. His voice carried a grim sense of finality. He confessed to the initial fraud and attempted a secondary extortion. "The audio is crystal clear. Are we moving to the next phase?" I asked, shifting the car into gear. Hayes paused for a moment. "Yes. Drive back to the headquarters, Olivia. The Joint Task Force is ready. It is time for you to formally sign the sworn affidavits." I steered the car onto the access road, leaving the diner and my brother in the rearview mirror. The emotional war was over. The procedural justice was about to begin. But as I merged onto the highway, my mind shifted to the inevitable fallout. My parents still believed they were holding the winning hand. They still believed their smear campaign would keep me quiet. I knew Richard Harrison would not surrender quietly. When he realized the trust money was permanently blocked, he would try to escalate his social warfare. I needed to ensure my signature on those state warrants struck the final decisive blow before he could launch another desperate attack. The drive back to the Texas State Department of Financial Regulation felt different than any commute I had ever made. The adrenaline from the diner had burned off, leaving a quiet, calculating focus. The highway stretched forward under the fading afternoon sun. I navigated the Austin traffic with practiced ease, pulling into the secure underground garage of the agency headquarters. The concrete walls and fluorescent lights offered a stark contrast to the emotional wreckage I had just navigated. My brother was currently driving back to his shadow lenders, believing he still had a chance to manipulate me. My parents were sitting in their pristine Dallas living room, believing their coordinated smear campaign was working. They were all operating under a fatal delusion. I rode the elevator to the 4th floor. The doors parted to reveal the quiet efficiency of the Financial Crimes Division. The usual hum of ringing telephones and clattering keyboards served as the soundtrack to my final severing of ties. I walked past the cubicles of my colleagues, holding my leather briefcase tightly against my side. Nobody looked up. Nobody knew that the Senior Fraud Investigator was about to indict her own bloodline. Director Hayes was waiting for me outside Conference Room B. The space was sterile and uninviting, featuring frosted glass walls, a long faux wood table, and ergonomic chairs designed for endurance rather than comfort. Sitting at the far end of the table was Marcus Thorne. Marcus is the lead state prosecutor assigned to the Financial Regulatory Board. He wore a crisp charcoal suit and possessed the pragmatic, unyielding demeanor of a man who sends white-collar criminals to state penitentiaries for a living. He did not offer a sympathetic smile when I walked into the room. He understood the gravity of the procedure. "Have a seat," Olivia Marcus said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "We have processed the audio recording from your wire. The technical unit confirmed the fidelity. Your brother clearly stated his intent to extort your signature in exchange for resolving the commercial debt he created using your stolen identity." I set my briefcase on the floor and sat down. The surface of the table felt cold under my forearms. I folded my hands together and waited. Director Hayes took the seat next to Marcus. He opened a thick manila folder and spread a series of legal documents across the table. These were not the investigative files or the digital audit trails I had compiled. These were the formal state affidavits. They were the sworn declarations required to trigger the issuance of active arrest warrants. "We are pursuing a multi-tiered indictment," Marcus explained, tapping a silver pen against the top document. "First, we have the fraudulent use of identifying information. That covers the forged power of attorney your father submitted to Texas Heritage Bank. Under the Texas Penal Code, that is a state jail felony. However, because he utilized digital banking networks to attempt a transfer of $520,000, the charge escalates to first-degree wire fraud." He slid the first stack of paper toward me. "The second tier involves the commercial promissory note," Marcus continued. "Your brother admitted on tape that the Vanguard commercial credit loan was fraudulently secured using your credentials. Since Apex Holdings is a verified wash plant for a cartel-affiliated distribution ring, the state is charging Liam Harrison and Richard Harrison with conspiracy to commit money laundering. Susan Harrison is named as an accessory for her documented efforts to silence the primary witness. Her texts and voicemails provided the necessary intent. I looked down at the documents. The bold, black text stood out against the stark white paper. The State of Texas versus Richard Harrison. The State of Texas versus Liam Harrison. The State of Texas versus Susan Harrison. The narrative of my childhood was reduced to criminal statutes and penal codes. The psychological warfare they had waged against me for decades was finally translated into a language the justice system could punish. Marcus placed the silver pen on top of the affidavits. I need you to review the declarations, Olivia. Once you sign these pages, the investigation shifts from a covert hold into an active enforcement operation. The judge is standing by to authorize the warrants. After the ink dries, there is no turning back. We will move to apprehend all 3 targets. The room fell silent. The air conditioning kicked on, rattling softly overhead. Director Hayes and Marcus Thorne sat quietly, granting me the space to process the weight of the moment. I stared at the names printed on the legal forms. A minor internal conflict flared in my chest. It was the last lingering ghost of the family I had always wished I had. For a fraction of a second, my mind conjured the memory of a summer afternoon when I was 10 years old. My father had taught me how to cast a fishing reel on a lake in East Texas. My mother had packed sandwiches. Liam had sat beside me on the dock. It was a fleeting image of warmth and unity. Society conditions us to cling to those rare moments of peace. We are taught to forgive the countless acts of betrayal, because blood is supposed to signify an unbreakable bond. The ghost of that idealized family tried to pull me back from the ledge. It whispered that signing these papers would destroy the people who gave me life. It suggested I could just walk away and let the cartel deal with Liam while I rebuilt my finances in silence. But that idealized family never existed. The man who taught me to fish was the same man who logged onto a computer in the middle of the night to steal my grandmother's legacy. The mother who packed sandwiches was the same woman who smiled while helping him do it. The brother sitting on the dock was a criminal using my name as collateral. My grandmother had established the trust fund because she saw through their facade. She knew my father operated a household based on financial control and emotional extortion. She handed me a shield. I was not going to let them turn it into a weapon. I reached out and picked up the silver pen. Breaking a generational curse requires a definitive action. It demands the courage to draw a line in the sand and refuse to carry the toxic burden of your ancestors. Protecting my financial future was only the surface-level objective. The true goal was survival. By signing these documents, I was rejecting my assigned role as the designated shock absorber. I was stepping out of their shadow and reclaiming my own existence. I pressed the tip of the pen against the signature line on the first affidavit. The cold, heavy scratch of the blue ink pen echoed loudly in the sterile room. The friction of the metal ballpoint against the rough paper felt grounding. I signed my full legal name with deliberate precision. I moved to the second document. The scratch of the pen continued a steady, rhythmic beat, dismantling their delusion of grandeur. I signed the third page, then the fourth. I authenticated every piece of evidence, every digital trace, and every recorded admission of guilt. I did not feel vengeful. I did not feel triumphant. I felt an overwhelming, profound sense of clarity. The act of signing was a necessary surgery to remove a malignant tumor from my life. When I reached the final page, I capped the pen and set it down. I pushed the stack of executed affidavits back across the table toward Marcus. "It is done," I said. My voice was unwavering. Marcus gathered the papers and aligned the edges with a sharp tap against the table. "I will walk these down to the judge right now. The warrants will be active within the hour." He stood up, nodded respectfully, and left the conference room. Director Hayes remained seated. He steepled his fingers and studied my face. "You did the right thing, Olivia," he said quietly. We will coordinate with the Joint Task Force to execute the arrests. Taking down Apex Holdings requires tactical precision given the syndicate ties. We need to apprehend Liam, Richard, and Susan simultaneously to prevent them from tipping each other off or destroying further evidence. I nodded, understanding the logistical hurdles. They all live in different locations. Liam is likely barricaded in his apartment near Fort Worth, waiting for me to wire the money. My parents are in Dallas. Hayes tapped his finger against the faux wood surface. Actually, we have an opportunity to resolve this efficiently. We ran a social media sweep on your parents to monitor their movements. Are you aware they are hosting a charity event this weekend? I blinked, processing the information. A charity event. Yes, Hayes confirmed, pulling a printed screenshot from his folder. They are co-hosting a high society gala at a rented ballroom in downtown Dallas this coming Saturday. The event is billed as a philanthropic endeavor funded by Apex Holdings. They are inviting the entire local business community to celebrate Liam and his successful real estate investments. The audacity of their plan struck me like a physical blow. Richard and Susan were not just hiding their crimes, they were actively flaunting their stolen wealth. Believing they had successfully intimidated me into silence, they were throwing a lavish party funded by the dirty money they had tried to steal from my trust. They were using my ruined credit to buy champagne and ice sculptures. They want an audience, I said, my voice turning icy. They want to stand in front of their wealthy friends and pretend they are a perfect, successful dynasty. Hayes closed the folder. It presents the optimal tactical environment. They will all be in one room, distracted and unarmed. We can seal the exits and execute the warrants without risking a prolonged standoff at multiple residences. The tension in the room shifted from procedural finality to a sharp, dangerous anticipation. The gears of the justice system were turning, and my family had unknowingly booked the venue for their own destruction. I looked at Director Hayes. I want to be there, I said. Hayes raised an eyebrow. You are a key witness, Olivia. Confronting them could compromise your safety. They will not hurt me in a room full of 200 high society donors, I replied. They care too much about their public image. They think I am broken. They told the extended family I am having a mental breakdown. If I show up, they will try to play the benevolent parents one last time before the hammer falls. I need to look them in the eye when they realize the illusion is shattered. Hayes considered my request for a long, silent moment. He understood the psychological necessity of the confrontation. Finally, he gave a single curt nod. Get a dress, Olivia. We are going to a gala. 3 days after I signed the sworn state affidavits, a thick ivory envelope arrived in my apartment mailbox. The Texas heat radiated off the metal cluster of boxes as I turned the small brass key. I pulled out a stack of utility bills and grocery store circulars. Hidden beneath the mundane paper was a rigid square of heavy cardstock. The return address printed on the back flap belonged to my parents. I walked back up the stairs to my apartment, running my thumb over the textured paper. The envelope possessed a significant physical weight, indicating expensive custom stationery. I sat at my kitchen counter and broke the wax seal. I slid the invitation out and placed it flat on the granite surface. The card featured ornate gold-embossed lettering that caught the overhead light. The text announced the inaugural Apex Holdings Philanthropic Gala. Below the sweeping cursive font, Richard and Susan Harrison cordially requested the honor of my presence to celebrate the philanthropic real estate investments of their son Liam. The venue was listed as the Crystal Pavilion. It is a notoriously expensive rented ballroom located in the heart of the downtown Dallas Arts District. I read the invitation a second time, letting the staggering hubris wash over me. My brother was currently defaulting on a $500,000 commercial mortgage tied to a shadow bank. He was running a physical wash plant for a cartel-affiliated distribution ring. My parents had just committed multiple felonies, attempting to steal my inheritance to bail him out. Yet instead of laying low or fleeing the jurisdiction, they were hosting a high society charity event. The absurdity of their delusion was breathtaking. They were spending tens of thousands of dollars on ice sculptures, catered champagne and string quartets, while effectively trying to rob their own daughter to cover a syndicate debt. They operated under the belief that maintaining the facade of wealth would somehow protect them from the consequences of their poverty. I leaned back on my kitchen stool and stared at the gold foil lettering. A sharp memory surfaced, contrasting their vanity against the reality of my own existence. For the past 10 years, I have guarded my financial independence with relentless discipline. I drove a reliable 10-year-old sedan with fading paint, while Liam leased a revolving door of imported sports cars he could never afford. I spent my weekends clipping coupons and packing turkey sandwiches into plastic containers for my lunches at the agency. I skipped vacations and shopped the clearance racks. I treated the trust my grandmother left me as a sacred shield. I refused to touch the principal balance, ensuring I would never end up trapped in the chaotic debt cycles that defined my childhood. My parents looked at my careful, frugal choices and branded me boring. They called my lifestyle uninspired. Meanwhile, they looked at Liam pouring illicit cash into superficial luxuries and praised his ambition. They valued the appearance of success over the foundation of integrity. I knew exactly what kind of catering they would order for this gala. Susan would insist on serving an edible gold leaf cake just to ensure the local real estate developers understood her refined palate. They were literally eating gold while drowning in toxic liabilities. I picked up the invitation and noticed a small printed URL at the bottom of the page, directing guests to a custom RSVP website. Their decision to mail this card to my apartment was a calculated psychological maneuver. My parents did not actually want me to attend their lavish party. They mailed the heavy cardstock assuming I would throw it in the trash out of sheer disgust. The invitation was merely a prop for their ongoing smear campaign. When the extended family gathered in the ballroom, Aunt Laura and Uncle David would inevitably ask where I was. Richard and Susan would offer sympathetic sighs. They would pull out this very invitation and claim they tried their hardest to include me. They would tell everyone that I was simply too unwell to show up. They wanted my absence to validate their narrative. I reached for my laptop and opened the internet browser. I typed the custom web address into the search bar. The screen loaded a digital replica of the gold-embossed card. A prompt appeared asking for my attendance status and meal preference. I moved the cursor over the dialog box. I did not hesitate. I clicked the button marked Yes. I selected the vegetarian dinner option just to force them to alter their catering headcount. I hit submit and watched the confirmation screen flash across the monitor. The tension in my chest tightened into a sharp, dangerous thrill. The audience of wealthy Dallas donors had no idea what they were walking into. My parents had no idea they had just provided the state of Texas with the ultimate tactical advantage. They thought this gala would be their crowning social achievement. Instead, it was going to be ground zero for a multi-agency raid. The next morning, I carried the invitation into the agency headquarters and dropped it onto the director desk. He picked up the heavy ivory paper and inspected the gold lettering. A grim smile touched the corners of his mouth. They rented the Crystal Pavilion, he noted, setting the card down. That is a highly secure venue with limited points of egress. The guest list will likely exceed 200 people. Politicians, local investors, and high-net-worth individuals who have zero idea they are rubbing shoulders with a cartel wash plant operator. I stood in front of his desk. I submitted my RSVP last night. I am going. The director opened a digital map of the downtown Dallas Arts District on his monitor. He traced the perimeter of the ballroom with his finger. If you walk into that room, they will try to corner you. They will attempt to control your behavior in front of their peers. I know, I replied, keeping my voice steady. But if I am inside, I can confirm visual identification on all 3 targets before the entry teams breach the doors. I can ensure Liam does not slip out through the kitchen loading docks. The director tapped his keyboard, bringing up a tactical overlay. The Joint Task Force will stage in the adjacent parking structures. We will have plainclothes officers posing as the valet attendants. The perimeter will be sealed by 7 in the evening. At exactly 8 o'clock, the primary entry team will move through the main foyer. You need to be clear of the crossfire zones by 7:50. I agreed to the parameters. The procedural briefing shifted the reality of the situation into sharp focus. The emotional war was over. The physical execution of justice was only 48 hours away. Friday afternoon, I left the office early to prepare my armor. I did not own clothing suitable for a high society charity gala. My closet consisted of tailored gray and navy suits designed for government courtrooms. I drove to a high-end boutique in the Domain shopping district. I bypassed the pastel gowns and the sequined dresses. I found a sleek floor-length dress in a deep, unyielding shade of emerald green. The fabric was heavy and structured, offering no unnecessary frills. It featured long sleeves and a high neckline, projecting a cold, professional authority. It was not a dress designed for a fragile victim. It was the uniform of a reckoning. I purchased the garment and hung it carefully in the back of my car. Saturday evening arrived, carrying the suffocating humidity typical of a Texas summer. The sun began to set, casting long orange shadows across the interstate as I drove north toward Dallas. The dashboard clock glowed brightly, tracking the minutes. Every mile marker brought me closer to the final confrontation. I navigated the tangled concrete interchanges leading into the downtown corridor. The Dallas skyline glittered against the twilight. I turned onto the tree-lined avenue approaching the Crystal Pavilion. The street was already clogged with luxury vehicles. Valet attendants in crisp white shirts darted between idling imported sedans and expensive sports cars. I recognized the tactical stance of the attendant who approached my window. He was a state police officer wearing an earpiece hidden beneath his collar. He took my keys without making eye contact. I stepped out onto the pristine sidewalk. The deep emerald fabric of my dress swept against the concrete. The heavy glass doors of the pavilion stood open, welcoming the elite crowd into the air-conditioned foyer. The faint, elegant notes of a live string quartet drifted out into the humid evening air. I walked up the marble steps, feeling the diamond-hard resolve lock into place. My parents believed they had won the war of attrition. They believed their money and their social status provided an impenetrable fortress. I handed my name card to the hostess at the entrance. She checked her digital tablet and offered a polite, rehearsed smile. "Welcome, Miss Harrison," she said, gesturing toward the grand archway. "Your family is waiting inside." I stepped past her and crossed the threshold. The impending doom settled over the glittering ballroom. The stage was set. The trap was armed. All I had to do was find my father and look him in the eye before the clock struck 8. The ballroom of the Crystal Pavilion was a monument to unearned arrogance. As I stepped through the grand archway, the high vaulted ceilings amplified the ambient noise of Dallas high society. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes echoed sharply against the polished marble floors. A string quartet played a classical arrangement in the corner, providing a refined soundtrack to a room funded by illicit street currency. Waiters in crisp black vests circulated with silver trays, offering delicate appetizers to local politicians, wealthy real estate developers, and corporate executives. None of the guests, laughing and mingling under the crystal chandeliers, possessed any idea they were celebrating a cartel wash plant. They believed they were attending a legitimate philanthropic gala. My parents had spared no expense to construct this illusion. I stood near the entrance, letting my eyes adjust to the brilliant lighting. My emerald green dress draped heavily against my silhouette, offering a stark contrast to the pastel gowns and sequined cocktail dresses surrounding me. I did not look like a woman suffering a manic episode. I did not look like an erratic daughter in need of an intervention. I looked like a state investigator who had come to collect a debt. The minor conflict erupted the moment the extended family noticed my arrival. Aunt Laura was standing near the cocktail bar holding a martini. She spotted me first. The polite social smile froze on her face, and the glass hovered midway to her lips. She tapped Uncle David on the shoulder and pointed. Within seconds, a ripple of shock moved through the cluster of relatives. These were the same people who had flooded my phone with texts accusing me of hoarding money and acting paranoid. My parents had told them I was institutionalized, or at least confined to my apartment under heavy sedation. Laura set her drink down and marched toward me. Her eyes darted across my face, searching for any sign of the psychological breakdown she had been promised. She wore a heavy pearl necklace and a look of manufactured maternal concern. "Olivia, sweetie," she gasped, reaching out to grasp my hands. We did not expect to see you here. Your mother said you were resting. Are you sure you should be out in public right now? The stress might be too much for your condition. I stepped back smoothly, letting her hands grasp empty air. I do not have a condition, Aunt Laura. I am perfectly healthy. Her brow furrowed in confusion. The narrative she had been fed was unraveling right in front of her. But Richard said you were having an episode. He said you froze the accounts because you were confused. We have all been so worried about your mental health. My father lied to you, I stated, keeping my voice even and pleasant. He lied to everyone. Enjoy the champagne, Laura. It was purchased with stolen money. I walked past her, leaving her standing frozen near the bar. The whispering escalated as I navigated deeper into the venue. Cousins and uncles cast sideways glances, expecting me to cause a scene. They expected a loud, emotional confrontation. They were conditioned to view boundary setting as a violent severing of ties. They did not understand that I had already severed the tie in a sterile government conference room 3 days ago. Today I was merely a spectator. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter and positioned myself near the center of the room. A towering ice sculpture dominated the main catering table. It was carved into the shape of a modern office building representing Apex Holdings. It was a literal monument to frozen assets melting slowly under the warm ballroom lights. The irony was almost too perfect. My brother Liam stood a few yards away, surrounded by a group of older investors. He wore a custom tuxedo and held a snifter of amber liquor. He was playing the role of the visionary entrepreneur, nodding along to a conversation about property tax rates. He looked nervous. His eyes darted toward the exits every few minutes. He knew the shadow lenders were expecting their payment. He did not know the joint task force was currently securing those same exits. Then the crowd parted and the major conflict arrived. Richard and Susan Harrison walked toward me. They navigated the ballroom with the practiced grace of a couple used to commanding attention. My father wore a tailored tuxedo that emphasized his broad shoulders. My mother wore a dark blue evening gown accented by a diamond necklace. They looked wealthy, untouchable, and supremely confident. When they saw me standing near the ice sculpture, a brief flash of panic crossed my father's face. It was quickly replaced by a smug, victorious smirk. He assumed my presence meant I had surrendered. He believed I had received the gold-embossed invitation, recognized my own defeat, and come to beg for forgiveness in front of their peers. They cornered me against the catering table, blocking my path to the rest of the room. Richard leaned in close, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper designed to stay beneath the music of the string quartet. "You finally came to your senses," he said. His breath smelled of expensive scotch. "I knew you would not drag this out forever. It took some time, but you realized you cannot fight your own blood." He took a sip of his drink, his eyes gleaming with arrogance. "I spoke to the attorney this morning. Since you are here, I assume you called the bank manager. The administrative hold will clear on Monday, and Liam can finalize his property transaction. We can put this ugly little misunderstanding behind us." Susan stepped closer, invading my personal space. She reached out and patted my arm with a patronizing tenderness. "That is my good girl," she cooed. "You made the right choice, Olivia. Family helps family. We will forget all the nasty things you said at the house. We have a table reserved for you near the front. Just smile and let us handle the business." I stood perfectly still, holding my glass of sparkling water. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice to tell them they were wrong. I looked at the man who forged my digital identity at 3 a.m. I looked at the woman who enabled his extortion and weaponized her affection to keep me compliant. I saw the exact price of my seat at their table. They demanded my financial ruin in exchange for a condescending pat on the arm. I looked at the people who used me and felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. The psychological warfare was over. The illusion of the sanctuary was dead. "I am not here to sit at your table," I said quietly. Richard frowned, his smug expression faltering. "What are you talking about?" "I accept your terms for my departure," I told them. The chilling calmness of my response unnerved them. This was not the reaction of a defeated daughter crawling back for approval. It was the calculated statement of a woman executing a final verdict. My mother pulled her hand away from my arm, as if the fabric of my emerald dress had suddenly turned to ice. Olivia, Richard hissed, his tone turning sharp and threatening. Do not start this again. Not here. You are going to ruin your brother's night. I shifted my gaze from his red, angry face to the heavy silver watch secured around his wrist. Then I looked down at my own plain leather watch. The sweep of the second hand ticked forward with mechanical precision. The ambient noise of the gala seemed to fade into a dull roar, leaving only the rhythmic ticking of time running out. I am not going to ruin his night, Richard, I replied, returning my eyes to his. But someone else is about to. The minute hand aligned perfectly with the 12. It was exactly 8 o'clock in the evening. The coordinated time for the state agents to execute the warrants had arrived. I took a slow sip of my water and turned my head toward the main entrance. The heavy glass doors of the Crystal Pavilion swung open, and the real guests finally arrived. The heavy mahogany double doors of the Crystal Pavilion did not just open, they fractured the carefully constructed atmosphere of the ballroom. At precisely 8 o'clock, the grand entrance was thrown back against the interior stone walls with a hollow echo. The sudden movement sent a visible shockwave through the crowd of 200 guests. In that exact microsecond, the live string quartet came to a sudden screeching halt. The primary violinist's bow slipped violently across the strings, creating a sharp, discordant wail that sliced through the laughter of Dallas high society. The music vanished, replaced by the heavy, synchronized rhythm of tactical leather boots striking the polished marble floor. A dozen armed state troopers clad in dark tactical gear swarmed through the entrance, moving with fluid military precision. They immediately fanned out along the perimeter, locking down every visible point of egress and blocking the emergency exits. Behind them walked Director Hayes, flanked by 4 senior fraud investigators from the state regulatory agency. The uniform officers did not draw their weapons, but their presence was an undeniable statement of authority that instantly neutralized the festive mood. The initial reaction of the room was a collective gasp, followed by a wave of panicked murmurs. The minor conflict of my extended family staring at my emerald dress was entirely obliterated by the arriving legal tsunami. The wealthy donors, local politicians, and corporate executives who had been sipping expensive champagne a moment ago began backing away from the center of the room. They pulled their flowing gowns and tailored tuxedo jackets inward, establishing a wide, empty circle of isolation. Left standing exposed in the middle of that circle, right next to the melting office building ice sculpture, were Richard Susan and Liam Harrison. My father did not immediately comprehend the reality of the situation. His lifetime of privilege and professional standing had insulated him from ever facing true accountability. He believed his position as a respected suburban patriarch granted him absolute immunity from the law. He took a sharp step forward, puffing out his chest and setting his Scotch glass down on the edge of the catering table with a loud click. He attempted to use his standard boardroom intimidation tactics to regain control of the room. "This is an outrageous violation of a private charitable event," Richard bellowed. His baritone voice boomed across the high vaulted ceiling, attempting to command the officers. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am a prominent member of this banking community, and this gathering is funded by a legitimate corporate entity. You have zero jurisdiction to march into a private ballroom and disrupt our guests. I demand to speak with your superior officer immediately." Director Hayes did not flinch. He walked directly into my father's personal space, stopping a mere 2 feet away. He did not raise his voice to match Richard's volume. He pulled a thick, folded sheet of white cardstock from his inner jacket pocket. It was the active arrest warrant backed by the sworn affidavits I had signed less than 4 hours ago. "Richard Harrison, your identity is precisely why we are here," Hayes stated. His voice carried a cold, unyielding clarity that resonated through the silent room. "I am the director of the Financial Crimes Division for the state of Texas. I am executing an arrest warrant authorized by a state judge." My father's face shifted from deep crimson anger to a sudden tight, pale rigidity. He opened his mouth to bluster another defensive statement, but Hayes cut him off, reading the formal charges loud enough for every donor in the room to hear. You are being taken into custody for identity theft under state statute first-degree wire fraud involving the unauthorized execution of a forged power of attorney and official obstruction of a government investigation, Hayes declared. The crowd of high society onlookers shifted again, a collective murmur of disgust rippling through the wealthy audience. The very peers my father had spent his life trying to impress were now pulling out their cellular phones, taking photos, and recording his public undoing. His pristine reputation was evaporating in real time. Before the officers could secure my father's hands, a sudden crash echoed from the catering line. My brother Liam had dropped his crystal snifter of liquor. The amber liquid splashed across his polished patent leather shoes as the glass shattered on the marble floor. Liam took one look at the tactical uniforms lining the walls, and his historical cowardice took control of his actions. Throughout his life, whenever a business venture collapsed, he had simply fled the jurisdiction, leaving our parents to clean up the financial debris. He assumed he could run away from this mess, too. He turned tail and bolted toward the back of the ballroom, aiming for the double swinging doors that led to the kitchen loading docks. He moved like a trapped animal, pushing past a frightened catering waiter. He did not make it 5 steps. The technical surveillance unit had mapped the entire structural layout of the pavilion before the breach. As Liam slammed his hands against the kitchen doors, they flew open from the opposite side. 2 plainclothes fraud investigators grabbed him by the lapels of his custom tuxedo, spinning him around and forcing his upper body flat against a stainless steel prep table right in view of the guests. The golden boy, who had spent the evening bragging about his hard work and strategic real estate investments, was pinned like a common thief, his hair disheveled, and his expensive Rolex scraping against the metal structure. They secured his wrists behind his back and marched him back into the center of the ballroom. Susan Harrison watched her son being dragged across the floor, and the horror of her shattered illusion finally broke through her denial. She realized the social standing she had sacrificed her daughter's future to maintain was permanently gone. She looked around the room, watching her country club friends turn their backs on her. Her desperate eyes scanned the crowd, searching for an escape route until they locked onto me. I was standing perfectly still in my deep emerald green uniform, my hands still resting securely around my sparkling water. I was the one variable they had failed to calculate. Olivia Susan screamed, her voice cracking into a shrill, hysterical sob that filled the silent ballroom. Do something! You work for the state. You have a badge. Tell these people who we are. Tell them this is all a terrible mistake. You cannot let them do this to your father and your brother. Think about the family name. Use your position to stop this right now. She genuinely expected the old childhood conditioning to kick in. She believed that even after they had stolen my inheritance, hijacked my identity, and tried to chain me to a predatory shadow loan, I would still step forward to absorb the blow for them. She wanted me to ruin my own career to preserve their dynamic of exploitation. I did not take a single step forward. I did not flash my badge to rescue them. I stood motionless, letting the heavy, unsettling silence settle over the room. I looked at the 3 of them through a lens of absolute clinical clarity. The invisible violence they had committed against me in the dark was finally being answered by the explicit structure of the American justice system. The officers stepped behind my father and mother. The sharp mechanical clicking sound of steel handcuffs ratcheting onto their wrists echoed loudly against the marble floors. It was a final, definitive sound that dismantled their delusion of grandeur. Richard kept his head bowed as the officers guided his hands behind his back, his banker composure fractured. Susan continued to weep, her makeup streaking down her face, as they led her toward the grand exit. Liam hung his head, walking between 2 investigators, his custom suit covered in dust from the kitchen wall. They were paraded past 200 of their wealthiest peers exposed as frauds and cartel accomplices. As the glass doors closed behind the transport team, the remaining guests remained standing in absolute silence. The illusion of the family sanctuary was dead. But as I took a deep breath of the air-conditioned air, a sudden movement caught my eye. Aunt Laura and Uncle David were marching toward my position, their faces twisted in deep fury, realizing that the daughter they had spent the week smearing was the architect of the entire raid. A new immediate conflict of the social fallout was already bubbling to the surface. Aunt Laura and Uncle David stopped inches away from the hem of my emerald dress. The ballroom was still echoing with the departure of the tactical team, but the social consequences were actively boiling over. Laura possessed a face flushed with raw indignation. She pointed a trembling finger at my chest. "You planned this," she hissed. "You brought state police to a charity event. You humiliated your own parents in front of the entire city over a financial disagreement." I kept my hands folded in front of me. I did not raise my pitch to meet her hysteria. "I did not bring the police, Laura," I replied. "Richard brought the consequences of his own hubris. I merely provided the venue for his reckoning." Uncle David stepped forward, attempting to utilize his physical size to intimidate me, just as my father had done days earlier. "This is a disgrace," he sputtered. "You destroyed your brother over a simple misunderstanding." I reached into the small clutch purse I was carrying. I pulled out a folded copy of the Vanguard commercial promissory note and handed it to him. "Read the guarantor signature line I instructed." Then I retrieved the printed IP trace from the forged trust document and placed it on top of the note. "Read the origin address, David. That is not a simple misunderstanding. That is a coordinated theft. You spent the entire week sending me messages calling me unstable because Richard told you to. You chose to believe a comfortable lie. Now you are holding the mathematical proof of their extortion." David stared at the papers. His blustering demeanor evaporated, replaced by a sudden, chilling realization. He recognized the address of the Dallas home. He saw my forged signature securing a high-interest shadow loan. He handed the documents to his wife. Laura read the text, and all the manufactured maternal concern drained from her features. She looked down at the marble floor, unable to meet my gaze. I turned my back on them and walked out of the crystal pavilion. The humid night air hit my face, carrying the distinct scent of ozone and exhaust fumes. I handed my ticket to the plainclothes valet officer. He brought my reliable sedan to the curb. I drove back to Austin, leaving the ruins of the Harrison family dynasty in my rearview mirror. 3 weeks passed. The narrative shifted from the explosive public confrontation into a cold, bureaucratic dismantling of Liam's criminal empire. I sat at my desk in the agency headquarters, looking at a sealed plastic evidence bag resting near my keyboard. Inside the clear plastic were the shredded remnants of Liam's fake ledgers. The task force had recovered the strips of paper from a commercial shredder located in the back office of the Fort Worth nail salon. The forensic accounting team had spent hundreds of hours piecing the documents back together. Those jagged strips of paper told the full story of the cartel wash plant. Liam did not possess the constitution for a protracted legal battle. After spending 3 nights in a county holding cell, the reality of his situation crushed his golden child persona. He accepted a plea arrangement offering the state prosecutors the names of his proxy service contacts and the routing numbers for the offshore syndicate accounts. In exchange, he received a reduced sentence in a medium-security state facility, keeping him isolated from the dangerous men he owed money to. My parents faced a much harsher reality. The justice system they had always mocked stripped them of everything. Because Richard and Susan forged the power of attorney to wire funds into a known criminal enterprise, the state prosecutors invoked civil asset forfeiture laws. In American jurisprudence, if a property is utilized to facilitate a felony, the government maintains the authority to seize that property. Richard had logged onto his residential router to commit wire fraud. Susan had utilized her personal cellular device to intimidate a witness. The state seized the pristine Dallas home. The manicured lawns, the vaulted ceilings, and the marble kitchen island where they had tried to extort me were now the property of the Texas government. The authorities froze their retirement accounts and liquidated their investment portfolios, classifying the funds as proceeds tied to a criminal conspiracy. The poetic justice was flawless. My parents had executed a ruthless scheme to steal my financial safety net. Their greed resulted in the absolute loss of their own. They traded their high society status for standard-issue orange jumpsuits and a public defender. With the criminal indictments secured, I focused on restoring my own existence. I drove back to Texas Heritage Bank on a Tuesday morning. I bypassed the teller line and walked straight into the glass-walled office of David Sterling. The branch manager looked terrified the moment I crossed his threshold. He remembered my state credentials, and he had read the front page of the Dallas Business Journals detailing the raid at the Crystal Pavilion. I placed the finalized state affidavits on his desk. These documents legally clear me of the Vanguard commercial note I stated. The shadow loan is officially classified as fraudulent and disconnected from my social security number. Now I need you to lift the administrative hold on the trust account. David did not offer any patronizing smiles. He did not tell me to go home and talk things out with my father. He typed rapidly on his keyboard, processing the legal clearances. Within 5 minutes, he turned his monitor around. The screen displayed my grandmother's trust. The balance read $520,000. Transfer the entire amount to a new routing number, I instructed, handing him a slip of paper. The destination was a high-yield account held by a different institution secured behind impenetrable multi-factor authentication and voice recognition software. No one would ever forge my signature again. The social fallout unfolded exactly as I predicted. Once the arrest records became public knowledge, the extended family realized they had backed the wrong horse. The people who had gleefully participated in the smear campaign suddenly suffered from collective amnesia. My phone began to ring. Aunt Laura left a tearful voicemail claiming she was manipulated by Richard and that she always knew deep down I was telling the truth. Uncle David sent a lengthy text message expressing his unwavering support for my difficult journey. Cousins who had ignored me for a decade suddenly wanted to meet for coffee to catch up. I did not reply to a single message. I deleted the voicemails. I blocked their phone numbers. I removed their access to my life. I ignored them all. They did not want to apologize to me. They wanted to apologize to a state investigator who had just proven she possessed the power to dismantle their patriarch. They were seeking proximity to strength, having realized their previous source of funding was sitting in a state penitentiary. I sat in my quiet Austin apartment, watching the sun set over the city skyline. I opened my secure banking application and stared at the glowing numbers. The trust was safe. The fraudulent commercial debt was erased. The toxic dynamic that had defined my entire life was permanently severed. I had survived the worst they could throw at me. But as the darkness filled my living room, a new unfamiliar tension settled into my shoulders. For my entire adult life, my primary motivation had been defense. I saved money to protect myself from my father. I chose a career designed to uncover the lies my family spoke fluently. Every decision I made was a reaction to their chaos. Now the chaos was gone. The fortress I had built was impenetrable, but it was also entirely empty. I closed the banking application and opened a new browser window. I typed a search query for real estate listings located outside the major metropolitan grid. I needed to figure out who Olivia Harrison was when she was not acting as a designated shock absorber. I needed to build something that belonged only to me. 8 months have passed since the tactical boots echoed across the polished marble floors of the Crystal Pavilion. The changing of the seasons brought a subtle shift to the Texas landscape, turning the brutal summer heat into a crisp autumn breeze. I did not stay in my small Austin apartment. The 4 walls that had served as my defensive bunker for a decade suddenly felt too restrictive. I needed open space. I needed a domain that belonged entirely to me, without any lingering memories of the anxiety I used to carry. I utilized a portion of my grandmother's trust to purchase a limestone ranch house situated on 3 acres of land deep in the hill country, far away from the sprawling concrete highways and the oppressive social expectations of Dallas. This morning I stepped out onto the back porch carrying a ceramic mug of black coffee. The warm morning sunlight crested over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the sprawling property. The bright rays hit the pristine, untouched soil of my expansive backyard. I had spent the previous afternoon tilling a large rectangular plot, preparing the earth for a spring garden. My parents would have hated this house. They would have called the dirt under my fingernails unrefined, and the rural isolation embarrassing. They preferred manicured lawns maintained by hired landscaping crews and sterile environments designed to impress wealthy neighbors. I prefer the raw, honest labor of cultivating my own ground. Every seed I plan to plant represents a choice I made for myself. Every flower that blooms will serve as a testament to the independence they tried to steal. As the end of the year approaches, the retail stores lining the local highways have started displaying seasonal decorations. The arrival of the festive holidays invariably triggers a minor internal conflict. Walking past aisles of artificial pine trees and matching ornament sets, I sometimes feel a sudden sharp pang of grief. It is the lingering ghost of the American myth we are all quietly conditioned to believe from childhood. We are taught that family serves as an unconditional safety net, a warm sanctuary from the transactional coldness of the outside world. Society dictates that estrangement is a failure of character. The cultural narrative insists that blood is thicker than water, and that walking away is a hostile act. I admit I miss the idea of a family. I miss the concept of a father who provides guidance rather than orchestrating financial ruin. I miss the theoretical version of a mother who bakes cinnamon rolls out of genuine affection rather than utilizing the scent as a calculated manipulative prop to soften the blow of extortion. I miss the notion of a brother who acts as a loyal confidant instead of a dangerous liability tethered to shadow bankers. But the grief is fleeting. It evaporates the moment I contrast that fictional ideal against the profound peace of my current reality. The silence of my ranch house is not the heavy, unsettling silence of a shattered illusion. It is the lightweight, tranquil quiet of a life unburdened by constant demands. I no longer wake up checking my banking applications in a panic to see if my identity has been hijacked in the dark. I sleep soundly, knowing my perimeter is secure. The legal machinery of the state has finalized the dismantling of the Harrison dynasty. Richard and Susan accepted formal plea agreements shortly after the civil asset forfeiture stripped them of their accumulated wealth. They traded their tailored tuxedos and diamond necklaces for standard-issue correctional uniforms. My father resides in a minimum security facility, serving a multi-year term for first-degree wire fraud. His pristine country club reputation is reduced to a prisoner identification number. My mother is completing a concurrent sentence for obstruction and conspiracy. Liam remains isolated in a separate state penitentiary, navigating the harsh consequences of crossing a cartel wash plant with predatory lenders. The criminal syndicate that utilized his Fort Worth retail center was systematically dismantled by the Joint Task Force, utilizing the paper trail I helped secure. I do not speak to them. I do not monitor their parole hearing schedules or send letters to their respective wardens. The extended relatives who flooded my phone with apologies and sudden declarations of support remain permanently blocked. I realized that allowing them back into my orbit would just invite a different breed of toxicity. They did not value me. They valued my proximity to the authority that took down their patriarch. Instead, I have cultivated a chosen family rooted in mutual respect rather than extraction. Director Hayes and my fellow investigators at the Department of Financial Regulation stood by my side during the most turbulent weeks of the prosecution. We share lunches in the break room and celebrate closed cases with quiet dinners at local restaurants. They do not view my competence as a communal asset waiting to be harvested. They recognize my skill as a professional achievement. The relationships I foster now do not carry a hidden balance sheet. I am valued for my character and my integrity, not for the depth of my savings account or my willingness to endure abuse. If you are listening to this and my journey resonates with your own experiences, I want to speak directly to you. Perhaps you are the designated shock absorber in your own household. Perhaps you are the reliable child, the competent sibling, the one expected to fix every mistake while absorbing the emotional and financial collateral damage created by others. You might be sitting in a parked car right now, dreading an upcoming holiday gathering where your boundaries will be mocked and your resources will be demanded. You might feel the crushing weight of the expectation that you must sacrifice your own hard-earned stability to keep the family unit intact. I want to validate the heavy burden you carry. In families where dysfunction serves as the native language, the child who manages to build a successful life is rarely celebrated. You are utilized. Your carefully guarded future transforms into an emergency ATM for relatives who refuse to manage their own choices. But you must understand that love holding an invoice is not love at all. It is a subscription service. You have the right to cancel your membership. Setting boundaries does not require a screaming match or slammed doors. It simply requires the diamond-hard courage to look at the people who are using you and refuse to pay the cover charge to remain in their toxic dynamic. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep your relatives warm. You possess the power to walk out the door and build your own sanctuary. I finished the last sip of my coffee and set the empty ceramic mug on the wooden railing of my porch. The Texas sun climbs higher into the bright blue sky, warming the limestone exterior of my home. My career at the agency continues to thrive. My trust fund remains protected behind impenetrable layers of security, generating interest and securing my future. My credit is pristine once again. Walking away from the people who raised you is never a simple, clean break. The silence that follows a fractured lineage carries a specific weight. During the first few weeks after the raid, I used to look out my window and wonder about the empty chair at their dining table. I wondered if they noticed my absence, or if the silence left a hole in their lives. But as the noise of their endless demands faded into a distant memory, a new, undeniable truth surfaced in the stillness. I look out over the untouched soil of my new garden, and I smile. I no longer wonder about that empty chair. I finally realized the truth about my place in the Harrison family. That chair at their table was never truly mine to begin with. I was simply paying a $520,000 rent for the privilege of keeping it warm. There is a uniquely American myth we are all quietly conditioned to believe from the moment we are old enough to understand the concept of home. We are raised on the postcard image of the family table, Thanksgiving dinners, white picket fences, and the unspoken sacred promise that no matter how harsh or unforgiving the outside world gets, your family is your unconditional sanctuary. But what happens when you wake up one day and realize the fortress isn't there to keep the danger out? What happens when you discover that you are simply the load-bearing pillar holding up a roof that is actively collapsing on top of you? Olivia's journey is not just a story about a forged power of attorney, a $500,000 trust, or a spectacular raid at a high-society Dallas gala. It is a profound, devastating mirror held up to a role so many of us have been forced to play, the designated shock absorber. In families where financial chaos and emotional manipulation are the native languages, the child who actually achieves the American dream. The one who works quietly, lives frugally, and builds their own stability is rarely celebrated. Instead, they are harvested. Their competence is treated as a communal asset. Their carefully guarded savings account becomes an emergency ATM for parents and siblings who refuse to take accountability for their own disastrous choices. The hardest lesson Olivia had to learn is one that strikes at the very core of our cultural conditioning. We are taught that blood is thicker than water, a phrase so often weaponized to demand infinite forgiveness for infinite betrayal. When her father stole her identity in the dead of night to bail out her brother's criminal enterprise, he didn't do it because he was a helpless man making a tough choice. He did it because he believed his daughter's future was a small price to pay to maintain his golden child's illusion of success. It was extortion wrapped in nostalgia. In our society, we often view setting boundaries as an act of hostility, a loud, violent severing of ties filled with screaming matches and slammed doors. But Olivia showed us that genuine boundaries are astonishingly quiet. They simply require the diamond-hard courage to look at the people who are using you, acknowledge the true price of their conditional affection, and hand them back the invoice. If you have ever found yourself staring at a ringing phone knowing the people on the other end only remember your name when the bills are due, or the consequences of their actions finally catch up to them, you are not walking this difficult road alone. There is a vast community of us who have learned the hard way that sometimes the most loving word you can speak to yourself is no. We invite you to subscribe and follow our channel Elderly Stories as we continue to share these deeply human journeys of reclaiming our worth, breaking generational curses, and finding peace. Walking away from the people who gave you life is never a perfectly clean break. The silence that follows a shattered illusion is incredibly heavy, filled with the lingering ghosts of the family you always wished you had. You might look out the window of your own safe, quiet home on a holiday and picture their grand dining room, the crystal glasses, and the warm light. But as the noise of their endless demands fades into a distant memory, a new unsettling question begins to surface in the stillness. Was that chair at their table ever really yours to begin with? Or were you simply paying the rent just for the privilege of keeping it warm?